The moment that doctor looked at my blood work and went pale, I knew something was wrong. She stepped out of the room without saying a word. Through the glass window, I watched her make a phone call, her hand pressed against her forehead like she was trying to process something impossible. 10 minutes later, 3 specialists crowded into the tiny ER room and stared at me like I was a ghost. Not with pity, not with concern, with complete and total disbelief. My name is Brady Sullivan. I am 38 years old. 3 months before that night, I was pulling down $85,000 a year as a master electrician at the ExxonMobil refinery in East Houston. I wore steel-toed Red Wings and a hard hat with my name stenciled on the front. I worked with 480-volt control systems that could turn a man into a charcoal briquette if he made one wrong move. I was somebody people respected, somebody who knew his trade inside and out like it was scripture. I was a man whose cheating wife and her millionaire boyfriend had systematically destroyed everything I spent 15 years building. I used to wire control panels for offshore drilling platforms, the kind that keep oil flowing from the Gulf of Mexico to refineries across Texas. I made union money, good money, the kind that let you buy a house with a 2-car garage and think about retirement with something other than fear. I had a Ford F-250, a workshop full of Klein tools that cost more than some people's cars, and a future that looked solid as the steel conduit I bent with my hands. Then my wife Tessa decided I wasn't ambitious enough for her taste. She found a logistics CEO named Chase Reynolds who had $45 million and all the things she believed she deserved. She didn't just leave me, she helped Chase burn my career to the ground like it was nothing more than kindling. He made phone calls to the right people, whispered poison in the right ears. I was fired without cause, blacklisted from every electrical contractor from Houston to Dallas. Watched my savings drain away drop by drop, while Tessa took the house and half of everything else I'd worked for. The night I started my janitor job, she sent me a photograph of herself on Chase's yacht somewhere in Galveston Bay. Crystal blue water stretching to the horizon, her in a white bikini that probably cost more than I made in a week, leaning against him with a champagne glass catching the sunlight. The message attached said 2 words that still echo in my head like a curse: enjoy poverty. So there I was, 3 months into my new life as the guy who mops floors for $12 an hour, sitting on a hospital bed with 3rd-degree electrical burns covering my right hand and forearm. I'd been trying to repair an emergency fault in the hospital's main electrical panel when a high-voltage cable decided to teach me a lesson about hubris. The explosion threw me backward into a concrete wall and left burns so deep you could see white bone through the charred flesh in places. They'd already told me I'd need skin grafts, maybe lose some function in 2 fingers. The pain medication made everything feel distant and surreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare through frosted glass. I expected them to patch me up, give me a prescription, and send me back to my studio apartment in a leaf to heal up enough to push a mop again. But when Dr. Linda Parker returned with those 3 specialists, when they closed the door behind them and pulled up chairs like they were about to deliver news that would shatter what was left of my world, I realized this was something different entirely. Something that had nothing to do with electrical burns and everything to do with secrets buried deeper than any foundation I'd ever worked on. The head of the genetics department sat down beside my bed and asked me a question that seemed to come from nowhere, like she was reading from a script I'd never seen. "Mr. Sullivan, was your father adopted?" I told her yes. Dean Sullivan was adopted as an infant in 1952. He never knew his biological parents, never searched for them, died believing the past didn't matter as long as you built something solid in the present. She nodded slowly, like I had just confirmed something she already suspected, but hoped wasn't true. Then she said a name that every person in Texas knows, a name attached to oil wells and refineries and billions of dollars in energy investments, a name that belonged to one of the wealthiest families in American history, the kind of name you see on buildings and scholarships and hospital wings. "Mr. Sullivan, according to your genetic profile, you are the biological grandson of Wade Anderson." Wade Anderson had died 2 months earlier at 94 years old. His death dominated the news for weeks because he left behind an estate worth over $9 billion, built on oil rights and petrochemical investments that stretched back to the 1930s. But there was a problem with his inheritance that lawyers and journalists had been picking apart like vultures ever since. Wade Anderson had no living heirs. His only son, Reed Anderson, died in a car accident in 1985 when he was just 35 years old. Reed never married, never had children, or so the official story claimed. When Wade passed away, his will specified that his fortune would go to any biological descendants. If none existed, the estate would be dissolved and distributed to charitable foundations across the country. But Reed Anderson did have a child, a baby boy born in secret in 1952, the result of an affair with a woman who worked at the family estate. The pregnancy was hidden, the birth covered up, and the baby was given up for adoption to protect the Anderson family's reputation. That baby was my father, and that meant I was the sole surviving heir to everything the Anderson family had built over nearly a century. The room started spinning, like I'd grabbed onto a live wire. My burns throbbed in rhythm with my heartbeat. My ears were ringing so loud, I could barely hear what the doctor said next. 3 months ago, my cheating wife texted me to enjoy poverty. That night in the emergency room, covered in electrical burns and wearing a janitor's uniform that smelled like disinfectant and failure, I discovered that poverty was about to become a distant memory, and revenge was about to become very, very affordable. For 15 years, I was living what I believed was the American dream. I woke up every morning at 5, kissed my wife goodbye, and drove 30 minutes through Houston traffic to the ExxonMobil refinery, where I worked as a master electrician. It was one of the largest petrochemical complexes on the Gulf Coast, a maze of pipes and towers and control systems that processed millions of barrels of crude oil into the fuel that kept America moving. We maintained electrical systems that most people never think about but couldn't live without. Motor control centers that ran pumps the size of small buildings. Variable frequency drives that controlled compressors worth more than most people's houses. Emergency shutdown systems that could isolate sections of the plant faster than you could blink if something went wrong. I was proud of that work, proud of the responsibility that came with it. When you're working with systems that could level a city block if they failed, pride isn't arrogance, it's survival. My salary had climbed steadily over the years until it reached $85,000 annually. I had full benefits, a company truck for emergencies, and a pension plan that would let me retire at 62 with dignity. I had performance reviews that used words like essential and irreplaceable. I believed I had earned my place in that world through 15 years of showing up early, staying late, and never backing down from a job that scared lesser men. The work wasn't just about money. Every electrician knows that electricity doesn't care about your bank account or your college degree. It'll kill a millionaire just as dead as it'll kill a homeless man. The only thing that matters is respect for what you're working with and the knowledge that comes from years of experience. I had both, and everyone on that plant knew it. My wife Tessa and I met at a backyard barbecue in Pasadena when I was 25 and she was 23. I was a third-year apprentice then, still learning the trade under an old-timer named Curtis Delacroix, who taught me that electrical work was equal parts science and art. Curtis could look at a motor control diagram and tell you what was wrong before he even opened the panel. He showed me how to read voltage drops like a book, how to troubleshoot a circuit by feel as much as by meter readings. Tessa was working in commercial real estate then, showing office buildings to businesses that were expanding with Houston's oil boom. She was beautiful in a way that made men forget their own names, but it was her ambition that caught my attention. She had this energy about her that made you feel like you were part of something bigger than yourself. When she looked at me and told me I was going to be somebody important, I believed her because I wanted to be the man she saw when she looked at me. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at a Methodist church in Deer Park. The reception was at the Union Hall, just family and friends from the refinery and her real estate office. My mother, Helen, cried through the entire service. My father, Dean, shook my hand afterward and told me he was proud of the man I had become. That was the last time I remember feeling completely at peace with my life, like all the pieces had fallen into place exactly where they belonged. My father passed away when I was 28. Heart attack on a Tuesday morning at the Phillips 66 plant, where he'd worked maintenance for 28 years. He was 58 years old and had hands like leather from decades of honest labor, but he never complained about anything. He used to say that a man's worth was measured by what he could fix, what he could build, what he could keep running when everyone else had given up and walked away. Dean Sullivan was adopted as an infant in 1952. He never knew his biological parents and he never searched for them. When I asked him about it once during a fishing trip to Galveston, he just shrugged and said, "The The people who love you are your real family, son. Blood's just chemistry. Love is what builds a life. I accepted that answer and never pushed further, never imagined that his blood carried secrets worth billions of dollars. After my father died, my mother became the center of our family universe. Helen had worked as a nurse at Harris Health for 30 years before retiring, spending her career in the ER, where she saw everything from gunshot wounds to heart attacks to overdoses. She was a tough woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that could spot a lie from across a room. She could start an IV on a heroin addict with collapsed veins or calm down a drunk oil worker with equal skill. Helen never completely trusted Tessa. She would make comments that seemed innocent on the surface, but carried warnings underneath, like storm clouds on a clear day. "That girl loves your potential more than she loves you, Brady," she told me once after a family dinner where Tessa spent the entire evening talking about money and advancement and people who had more than us. "Just remember that a woman who marries you for what you might become will leave you for someone who already became it." I dismissed it as typical mother-in-law friction. Mothers never think anyone is good enough for their sons, I told myself. Helen would come around eventually, once she saw how happy Tessa made me and how hard we were working to build a life together. I had a younger brother named Brock who lived in Austin with his wife Kelly and their twin daughters. He was a pipeline welder who specialized in high-pressure systems, traveling from job to job across Texas and Oklahoma, wherever the oil and gas industry needed critical repairs. We talked every few weeks, traded text messages about football games and family updates, but we were never particularly close. He had his life on the road, and I had mine anchored to the refinery. My life revolved around two things: my work and my marriage. I poured everything into both like they were the only investments that mattered. I worked overtime whenever it was available, pulling double shifts during turnarounds when the plant shut down for maintenance. I took Tessa on vacations to places she wanted to visit, weekend trips to San Antonio and New Orleans, longer vacations to Colorado and California when my schedule allowed it. I bought her jewelry for anniversaries and surprised her with flowers for no reason other than seeing her smile. I thought I was building something permanent, something that would last the way my parents' marriage had lasted through good times and bad. I believed in our marriage the way I believed in the electrical systems I maintained. If you did the work right and checked your connections regularly, everything would keep running smooth for decades. The first cracks appeared about 2 years before everything collapsed. Tessa had transitioned from residential real estate into high-end commercial properties. She started attending networking events with wealthy clients, showing office buildings and luxury developments that cost more than I would earn in a decade. She came home later and later, always with stories about the important people she'd met, and the deals worth millions of dollars that she was helping to broker. She talked constantly about money, about people who had more than us, about the lifestyle she deserved but couldn't have married to an electrician. The conversations always followed the same pattern. She would describe someone's penthouse or yacht or vacation home, then look around our house like it was a prison she'd been sentenced to serve time in. I noticed the changes, but convinced myself they were just phases. Career ambition, professional growth, nothing to worry about. Every marriage goes through rough patches, I told myself. The oil industry was booming, and she was just trying to position herself to take advantage of the opportunities. I trusted her completely, because I had never had a reason not to trust her. I believed in our marriage the way I believed in Ohm's law and Kirchhoff's voltage law, fundamental principles that governed how things worked. I was wrong about all of it, and I was about to discover exactly how wrong I had been. The night I discovered the truth about Tessa, I came home early from a shutdown at the refinery. We'd been replacing motor control centers in Unit 7, and I'd finished my section ahead of schedule. The house was quiet when I walked through the front door. Her BMW was in the driveway, but she didn't answer when I called her name. I figured she was on a conference call with a client, something that happened more and more frequently. I walked upstairs to change out of my work clothes and shower off the refinery smell that clung to everything like crude oil. That's when I heard her voice coming from our bedroom. She was laughing, that soft, intimate laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I stood outside the door and listened to her talking on the phone, and the words I heard made my blood run cold. "He has no idea," she was saying. "He's so focused on his electrical panels and overtime hours that he doesn't notice anything. I could pack a suitcase and walk out tomorrow, and he probably wouldn't realize I was gone until his dinner got cold on the table. My chest tightened like someone had wrapped electrical tape around my ribs. I pushed the door open slowly, the way you approach a live panel that might have a fault. She was lying on our bed in a silk robe, her phone pressed to her ear, smiling at something the other person said. When she saw me standing there, her face went pale for exactly 2 seconds. Then she recovered and told whoever she was talking to that she would call them back. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, sitting up and pulling the robe tighter around herself. "Long enough," I said. She didn't apologize. She didn't make excuses or try to explain what I'd heard. She just sighed like I was an inconvenience she had been tolerating for too long, like a circuit breaker that kept tripping and needed to be replaced. "His name is Chase Reynolds," she said. "He owns Reynolds Logistics. We've been seeing each other for about 8 months now." 8 months. She said it so casually, like she was telling me about a gym membership she forgot to mention. I felt my knees go weak. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself, the way you grab the nearest grounded surface when you've been shocked. "Why?" I managed to ask. She stood up from the bed and walked toward her closet like we were discussing what to have for dinner. "Because Chase is going places, Brady. He has $45 million and contracts with every major oil company in the Gulf. He takes me to Cabo for the weekend just because he feels like it. He introduces me to people who actually matter in this world, people who can do something with their lives besides fix other people's broken equipment." She pulled out a suitcase and started folding clothes into it with practiced efficiency. "You take me to Chili's and talk about voltage drops and conduit runs like they're the most important things in the universe. You're 36 years old and you're never going to be anything more than what you are right now." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to remind her about all the things I'd given her, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the overtime hours I'd worked to pay for the house and the car and the vacations she took for granted. But all I could do was stand there in shock while the woman I had loved for 13 years dismantled our marriage with the indifference of someone disconnecting a piece of equipment that had outlived its usefulness. "I want a divorce," she said, not even looking at me. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll get the papers next week." The next 3 months were the worst of my life. Tessa moved into Chase's penthouse in River Oaks while our lawyers fought over assets like vultures picking at roadkill. She wanted the house. She wanted half my pension. She wanted spousal support because she claimed her career had suffered while supporting my ambitions. The cruelty of that argument made my head spin like I'd touched a live wire. I had supported her through every career change, every certification course, every networking event that kept her out until midnight. I'd covered the mortgage when her commissions were light, paid for her car when the transmission went out, never once complained about the money she spent on clothes and spa treatments and dinners with clients. But now, according to her lawyer, I was the one who had held her back. The financial devastation was brutal, but it was nothing compared to what came next. 3 weeks after Tessa filed for divorce, I was called into the office of Roy Patterson, the operations manager at ExxonMobil. Roy was a company man through and through, tall and lean, with gray hair and cold eyes, who ran the electrical department like a military unit, where questioning orders was grounds for court-martial. "Sit down, Brady," he said, not looking up from the paperwork spread across his desk. I sat across from him while he shuffled documents and avoided eye contact, like a man about to deliver bad news he didn't want to be responsible for. The silence stretched out between us until I could hear the air conditioning cycling on and off. "We're restructuring the maintenance department," he finally said. "Your position has been eliminated effective immediately. HR will process your severance and collect your credentials." I felt like I had been sucker punched by a hydraulic press. "Eliminated? Roy, I've been here for 15 years. My safety record is spotless. I just finished the Unit 7 Motor Control Center upgrade 2 months ahead of schedule and under budget." He finally looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that told me this decision had nothing to do with my performance or any restructuring. This was personal, and it came from somewhere above his pay grade. "The decision has been made," he said. "Security will escort you to your locker to collect your personal belongings." 2 security guards walked me through the plant like I was a criminal, past the control rooms where I'd spent countless hours troubleshooting complex electrical faults, past the motor control centers I'd installed with my own hands, past coworkers who looked away like unemployment was contagious. They watched me clean out my locker and turn in my hard hat, my safety glasses, my electrical meters that the company had issued me over the years. I found out later what had really happened. Chase Reynolds didn't just own a logistics company. He was connected to the oil industry in ways I'd never imagined. His company transported equipment for offshore drilling platforms, specialized machinery that cost millions of dollars and required careful handling. He also had service contracts with 3 electrical contractors that regularly did work for ExxonMobil during shutdowns and turnarounds. Chase had made phone calls. He had whispered poison in the right ears, told the right lies to the right people. He'd convinced Roy Patterson and the plant management that I was unreliable, that I had performance issues, that I couldn't be trusted around critical electrical systems. He had decided that ruining my marriage wasn't enough entertainment. He wanted to destroy my career too, just to see if he could. The severance package was an insult wrapped in legal language. 6 weeks of pay for 15 years of dedication, 15 years of perfect safety records and commendations, and overtime shifts during emergencies. My lawyer said I could fight it, but litigation would cost more than I would ever recover. And Chase had resources to drag it out for years. The legal system was designed for people who could afford to wait for justice. I couldn't afford to wait weeks for groceries. I applied to every electrical contractor within 100 miles of Houston. I sent out resumes, made phone calls, reached out to former coworkers and union contacts who had moved to other companies. The responses were always the same. Polite rejections, positions suddenly filled, interviews that ended with promises to call back that never materialized. I didn't understand what was happening until my old work partner Bobby Martinez took me out for a beer at a dive bar near the ship channel and told me the truth. Bobby was a good electrician, a family man who'd worked beside me for 8 years and knew my reputation better than anyone. "Chase Reynolds has been making calls, Brady," he said, staring into his beer like it held answers to questions he didn't want to ask. "He's telling people you were fired for safety violations, that you can't be trusted around high voltage systems. He's saying you falsified inspection reports and cut corners on critical installations." The words hit me like 480 volts through my chest. In the electrical trade, your reputation is everything. Safety violations and falsified reports weren't just career killers. They were criminal charges waiting to happen. No contractor would hire someone with that kind of cloud hanging over them. "Nobody believes it," Bobby continued, "but nobody wants to take the risk either. There's too much liability involved, too much money at stake. One accident with your name on it, and they're looking at lawsuits worth millions." I was blacklisted, erased from an industry I had given my entire adult life to, and there was nothing I could do about it. Chase Reynolds had connections and money and influence, and I was just one electrician who had made the mistake of marrying a woman who belonged to someone richer. Within 6 months, I went from a union electrician with a pension to a studio apartment in Alief, one of the roughest neighborhoods in southwest Houston, 400 square feet with water stains on the ceiling and bars on the windows. I could hear my neighbors arguing through walls so thin they might as well have been cardboard. At night, sirens wailed constantly, and I learned to sleep with a pillow over my head. My savings evaporated faster than refrigerant from a punctured line. Rent, food, utilities, truck payment, insurance premiums that doubled when I moved to Alief. The math never worked, no matter how many times I ran the calculations. I sold my tools first, the Klein lineman's pliers and fluke meters that had been my livelihood for 15 years. Then my hunting rifles, my fishing gear, everything that wasn't essential to basic survival. It still wasn't enough to keep me afloat. My mother called me every single day. She begged me to move in with her, but I couldn't do that to a 70-year-old woman living on Social Security and her pension from Harris Health. Her house in Pasadena was small, and her health wasn't what it used to be after 30 years of 12-hour shifts in the emergency room. I refused to become another burden she had to carry. "I'm fine, Mom," I told her every time, the lie burning my throat like acid. "I just need to get back on my feet." I wasn't fine. I was drowning in debt and shame and the crushing realization that everything I'd built could be destroyed by one phone call from a rich man who wanted to steal my wife. The only job I could find was a night janitor position at Houston Methodist Hospital. $12 an hour to mop floors, clean bathrooms, empty trash cans, and scrub things that made my stomach turn. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother had worked at this same hospital for 30 years as a respected professional. Now, her son pushed a mop bucket through these halls like a ghost that nobody wanted to acknowledge. I worked the overnight shift from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. The hospital never slept, but the night hours had a different rhythm, quieter and lonelier. I moved through corridors where doctors and nurses rushed past without making eye contact. I was invisible, just another guy in a gray uniform with a name tag that nobody bothered to read. The shame was overwhelming. I had spent my entire adult life building something I was proud of. I had maintained electrical systems that kept critical infrastructure running 24 hours a day. Now I was scrubbing toilets and picking up medical waste for less money than I used to spend on work boots. The night she sent me that text message, I was on my hands and knees cleaning up a spill in the emergency department waiting room. Blood and vomit from a car accident victim who'd been rushed into surgery. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw her name on the screen. Against every instinct screaming at me to delete it, I opened the message. It was a photograph of Tessa and Chase on a yacht. Clear blue water of Galveston Bay stretching to the horizon. She was wearing a white bikini that probably cost more than I made in a month, leaning against him with a champagne glass catching the afternoon sunlight. They looked like an advertisement for a life I would never have, could never afford, could never even dream about. The caption beneath the photo said 5 words that burned themselves into my memory. Enjoy poverty. Should have been more ambitious. I stared at that message for a long time. Something inside me cracked. Not broke, because breaking implies giving up. Cracked, like metal under stress that's about to fail catastrophically. I didn't respond. I put my phone back in my pocket and finished cleaning the spill. Then I went back to work, because that was the only thing left I could control. 3 months passed in a blur of exhaustion and routine. I lost 25 pounds because I couldn't afford to eat properly. I stopped calling friends because I had nothing to say that wouldn't sound like begging. I existed in a fog of despair that grew thicker every day, like smoke from an electrical fire you can't locate. The night everything changed started like any other shift. I was responding to an emergency call in the hospital's main electrical room. One of the backup generators had thrown a fault code, and the hospital's power grid was running on reduced capacity. They needed someone who understood electrical systems, and despite my janitor title, word had gotten around that I knew my way around a control panel. The problem was obvious once I opened the main distribution panel. A high-voltage feeder cable had worked loose from its termination lug and was arcing against the panel housing. Standard procedure would have been to shut down the main breaker and call for an electrical contractor. But the hospital was running multiple surgeries, and people's lives depended on that power staying online. I grabbed an insulated hot stick and tried to push the cable back into its proper position. That's when everything went wrong. The cable shorted out completely, creating an arc flash that filled the room with superheated plasma and threw me backward into the concrete wall like I'd been hit by a truck. When I regained consciousness, my right hand and forearm were burned so severely that I could see bone through the charred flesh. The pain was unlike anything I had ever experienced, like being burned and electrocuted, and beaten with a sledgehammer all at the same time. I stumbled out of the electrical room and collapsed in the hallway, convulsing from shock and electrical trauma. Dr. Linda Parker found me there, barely conscious and going into shock from the burns and blood loss. They rushed me into the emergency department as a patient instead of the invisible janitor who cleaned their floors. Dr. Parker examined my injuries and immediately called for surgery. "You've got 3rd-degree electrical burns down to the bone," she said, while nurses started IV lines and pushed pain medication. "We need to get you into surgery right now to debride these burns. We're also going to run extensive blood work to check for electrical trauma to your heart and other organs." I nodded through the haze of morphine and let them do their job. I assumed they would check my cardiac enzymes, maybe test for kidney damage, the standard protocols for electrical injuries. I had no idea that a routine blood test was about to unravel a secret that had been buried for almost 40 years. 3 hours later, I woke up in the ICU with my hand wrapped in surgical dressings and Dr. Parker standing beside my bed with an expression I couldn't read. She wasn't alone. 2 other doctors flanked her, both looking like they'd just seen something impossible. "Mr. Sullivan," Dr. Parker said carefully, "we found some unusual genetic markers in your blood work. I've asked some colleagues to consult on your case. And that's when they told me about Wade Anderson and Reed Anderson and the $9 billion secret hidden in my DNA. That's when I learned that the janitor who'd been scrubbing toilets for $12 an hour was actually the richest man in Texas. I looked down at my bandaged hands and smiled for the first time in months. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls of my own. Chase Reynolds was about to discover that the electrician he had destroyed was now powerful enough to buy and sell him like a spare part. And Tessa's message to enjoy poverty was about to become the most expensive text message in history.